Hey, Miss Flame here. I've now painted Owen from Massive Darkness, my first hero painted from that game. I'll first show you the fully painted figure so you can see how my miniature will look. Then after that I will go to the painting steps. I will show you how I've painted, what paints I've used, and I will tell you a bit what I have done. Then after that, so in the end, I'll just talk about the miniature, about my thoughts, about what I was going for, and just giving you some extra information when I was painting it. So let me first show you my painted miniature. Let's paint. After letting the miniature dry for at least 24 hours, I applied the anti-shine matte varnish from the Army Painter. First I will use the color Off-White from Vallejo for the teeth, and after that I will use the colors Brown Sand with Pale Flesh from Vallejo for the skin. I start with the teeth so it will be easier to go over any excess areas I painted with the white color with the skin color tone. For the skin I will use a 50-50 mix of brown sand with pale flesh. So I'll mix in 1 drop of brown sand with 1 drop of pale flesh. I'll paint his face and his hands with this color. I also make sure to paint over the areas next to the face and hands. This way I will avoid having any gray spots between colors later on. For the robe he is wearing, I will use the color Black Red from Vallejo. I start to paint this area next to actually define everything that is the robe and fabric he is wearing. This is a very big part of the miniature. When it was not painted yet, I was not sure what was and what was not the robe. Because I did not want to find out later I missed any part of the robe. Later on I will start to add the highlights, but first I want to define the other areas. So his armor and other items on the miniature. I painted 2 thin layers in this color. For the armor I used the colors Plague Brown and Polished Gold from Vallejo. The next thing that I wanted to define is the shiny golden armor. Here I also wanted to make sure I would not miss any part of the armor later on. To make the armor in this nice and shiny gold, I started first to paint the color Plague Brown. Metal paints can get very clumpy and the areas to paint in gold are pretty big. This will actually make the gold pop more, and I can paint 2 thin layers over it with polished gold. So after painting the armor in Plague Brown, I liked how the armor looked and I wanted to paint the gold to have a better look at the armor. The armor will be the focus point of this miniature. For the bundle under his shield, I used the color Ardennes Green from scale 75. I decided to go with a green color to give a small boost to the red color to make it pop more. I've also considered a more blue-gray color. The blue tones will go very well with the red robe and the yellow armor. For the belts, I used the colors Bosh Chestnut from scale 75 with Beasty Brown from Vallejo. I'll mix these colors with a 50-50 ratio. This will give me a darker and stronger brown color for all the belts. I will also paint the belts of the bundle in this color. And there is a small belt on the top of his right leg with the robe. It is a very small and you can easily miss it. For his hair I used the colors Chocolate Brown with English Uniform from Vallejo. I will also mix these colors with a 50-50 ratio. This will give a different dark brown hair color. For all the metal parts I used the color Chainmal Silver from Vallejo. I'll paint his swords, shield and the buckles with this color. I used 2 thin layers of paint. You basically paint the areas that are not painted yet and just lightly touch the buckles on his belt. The miniature already starts to look good. All the base colors have been applied, so the next thing to do is to apply the shade to the miniature. For the skin I will use the color Reikland Fleshshade from Citadel. I will use it straight out of the bottle on his face and hands. After that I will use Nuln Oil first on the swords and shield. Also here, I will just use Nuln Oil straight out of the bottle. But for the brown parts, hair, buckles, and the hilts of the swords and the pouch, I will use a 50-50 mix of Nuln Oil with water. After the shade, I first went back with the color Chainmal Silver. This time I added more water on the metal color to get a nice thin coat. I'll first go over the sword and buckles again. The shield is actually pretty beat up. You can see the nice details after the shade very well. I applied a very thin coat to the shade, just lightly touching the areas. I did not go over the part on top of the shield where it looks like a part is missing. After that I used the color Silver from Vallejo. I painted one side of the swords with this color and a even thinner coat on the right side of the shield, on which I used the Chainmal Silver. For the armor I will use polished gold with silver. I'll mix these colors with a 50-50 ratio. I will only paint the edges and raised parts of the armor with this color. The armor has some nice edges and embellishments. You can see those on the shoulder pads, for example. I will also lightly touch the studs on the armor, mainly being found on the chest piece of his armor. For the robe I used the colors Red from Vallejo and Bloodletter glaze from Citadel. I really like the dark red burgundy red the robe has right now with the shiny gold armor. So I decided to mainly keep this color and not do many highlights or bright colors over this. I will apply a thin layer of this color on mainly the raised parts and leave the recesses and other areas with the darker color. I finish off the robe with applying a thin layer of Bloodletter glaze. I will thin down the glaze to at least a 50-50 ratio of glaze with water. Then I will apply a thin layer on the areas I painted with the color red. I'll first paint the whole base with Huldra blue and Ardennes blue from scale 75. I'll mix these colors with a 50-50 ratio. I'll paint the patterns of the stone with a 50-50 mix of Graphene grey and black. I also painted the trim of the base in this color. Then I will use the color Sombra Grey from Vallejo. I'll paint a bit less than 50% of the stones with a very thin layer of this paint. Of the stones painted with this color, I will go over some of it with a very thin layer of the darkest color of the base. After letting the miniature dry for at least 24 hours, I applied the anti-shine matte varnish from the army painter. So he's already done painted and I'm really happy with the result. He was actually fairly easy and simple to paint. I did not do really any super highlights or anything really tricky. So that actually surprised me because when I looked at the miniature, I knew I was going to paint him first because he had this huge red robe. I love the color red, painting red. So I was like, that's a good idea to get me started in these miniatures to see what I want, what I was going for. And I was fully ready to fully paint that red robe. But when I was painting him, I first did the base layer of the dark red and then painted the rest of the miniature so I could see, okay, what is the robe so I don't miss anything, as I said before, but also to see like what color I would go for. Then while painting the miniature, I painted him in this really nice shiny gold armor, and that's actually the part of him that I wanted to stand out. And I was like, wow, this dark red color actually goes so well with this shiny gold armor. So at the end, I really had to constrain myself to not pull all my red dyes and just go bananas on the highlighting with the red color. But I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to grab one red paint, and I chose the color Red from Vallejo. I did some painting with it, some highlights, I would say, just to make the robe like pop a bit and to make it a dark color, but still to show you and others like he is wearing a red robe, but still be subtle. So it's just putting the red color mainly actually on the front side of the miniature to just make that pop a bit, keeping the darker color mainly in the recesses and other areas. I did something completely different for his back. For the back I used not as much color from red. I kept it with a dark red color most of the time. What I did there was a little different. So with the rope on his back you have this part that, like, I don't know, flourish, like goes up a bit with the edges. So what I did there, I mainly focused to put a little bit of red like at the end of the rope that was, you know, flourishing and going up or being there at the end. What I did there was I created a bit more depth. So your eye would be drawn to the front side of his back, and then the parts behind it were in this darker red. So I created this lighter to dark color, which created some depth. But when I was painting the rope from his back, I really noticed something. I could feel like a flow, like his rope was moving, like he would move this way, and so his rope would go that way. And I was like, wow, that's really cool. So instead of just making the rope pop there, I tried to mimic the flow, like a movement of his rope. So if I had a part of his rope that was going from this side to the other, what I did, instead of going to highlight, let's say here where probably most of the light would fall, I was focusing more on the upper part. And I did that through the whole back of the rope, and that way I mimicked like the flow, like the movement of the rope, and I found that very interesting, and for me it worked really well. Also, the way I painted this miniature, it's great if you're a newer painter or you're not used to doing really highlights and you just want to try it out, because I just used two colors of red. So the dark red, just base color, and then the color red. I played around with it, just put it where on raised parts where I found that it would fit. But if I made any mistakes, or if you make any mistakes, it doesn't look good, or you put it on the wrong spot, or anything goes wrong, you just go back with that darker color and you can really go over it and, you know, to fix it. So either you can go over it with a bit more thicker layer, so it will completely cover your mistake, or sometimes I actually used a very thin layer of that darker color, go over the area that I found to be too bright or that I found that didn't look so well. So what happened there, it really toned down the light color, so that gave a really cool effect. So sometimes I left that with it, but sometimes I could just go over with the bright color and just to fix it and make it look better. Also, I really enjoyed that he has this really bright gold armor. I went all out, tried to make it as bright, shiny gold as I could. And I think to have the trims with that like silver gold color, that was really interesting and fun to do. It is actually little details, so I had to focus to do that, but again, it was really not hard. And if I made a mistake, I could easily go back with the normal gold color just to fix it and try again. I hope you enjoyed watching this video. If you have any questions about anything, about this miniature or something else, you can always leave them in the comments below. Oh, and if you're still here, can you please leave a thumbs up? I'm actually curious if and how many people are watching my videos to the end, so that will really help. I assume you're still here, but all I know is I'm talking, just rambling on in this room all by myself and nobody out there. But I do hope to see you in my next video.